17. On Hester, nearing his father's warehouse, Sonny stared out the Packard side window at streets teeming with men and women scurrying around on some business or other. Clemenza was at the wheel, driving slowly over the cobblestones, while Vito sat quietly alongside him in the passenger seat. Sonny concentrated on keeping his mouth shut and not jumping into the front seat and cursing out Clemenza, who had been treating him like a scumbag ever since he'd shown up at Leo's and pulled him out of work. His father hadn't thus far said a word. Clemenza had pulled Sonny along roughly by the arm and thrown him into the back of the Packard, and Sonny had been too surprised by the fat man's bulk and power and too shocked by the way he was being treated to react until he was in the car and saw his father in the front seat. When he had asked angrily what the hell was going on, Clemenza had told him to shut up, and when he'd asked again, shouting, Clemenza had shown him the butt of his gun and threatened to crack his skull open with it, and through all this, Vito had remained silent. Now Sonny had his hands in his lap and his mouth shut as Clemenza parked in front of the warehouse. Clemenza opened the back door. "Shut up, kid," he said, leaning close to Sonny as he got out of the car. "You're in trouble here," he added in a whisper as Vito waited on the sidewalk, pulling his overcoat tight around him. "What did I do?" Sonny asked. All he had on were the grease-stained overalls he'd been wearing at work, and the cold nipped at his nose and ears. Clemenza said, "Just follow me. You'll get plenty of chance to talk in a minute." On the sidewalk near the warehouse door, Vito spoke for the first time. The subject had nothing to do with Sonny. "Is Luca out?" he asked Clemenza. "Last night," Clemenza said. "He's with a couple of his boys." At the mention of Luca Brazzi, Sonny's heart did a quick dance, but before he had time to think through the implications, he was inside the warehouse looking at 5 chairs arranged in a semicircle in front of stacks of olive oil crates. The space was damp and cold, with a gray concrete floor and a high ceiling of exposed metal beams. The wood crates of olive oil were stacked 10 feet high around the chairs so that it felt like they were in a room inside the larger space of the warehouse. Sonny's boys were bound and gagged in the chairs, Cork in the middle, with Nico and little Stevie on one side of him and the Romero twins on the other. Richie Gatto and Jimmy Mancini stood with their backs to the crates on one side of the semicircle, and Eddie Veltri and Ken Cusimano were on the other side. The men were all dressed nattily in 3-piece suits and polished shoes, while the boys, in comparison, looked like street scum, their winter coats in a pile on the floor behind them. From out of a corridor in the stacks of crates, Tessio appeared with his head down, working at his zipper, which was apparently stuck. He got it fixed just as he entered the little room. When he looked up, he said, "Hey, Sonny, look what we found." He gestured to the chairs. "It's the Hardy Boys gone bad." The line made everyone laugh, except for Sonny and Vito, and Sonny's boys with their arms tied behind their backs in the chairs. "Basta," Vito said. He moved into the semicircle and looked back at Sonny. "These mortadella," he said. "They've been stealing from Giuseppe Mariposa, causing him trouble and costing him money, and because I have business ties with Mr. Mariposa, they're causing me trouble and threatening to cost me money." "Pop!" Sonny took a step toward his father. "State zit!" Vito's open hand shot up in a warning, and Sonny moved back. "I noticed that young Mr. Corcoran here," Vito said, approaching Bobby. "He's been to our house many times over the years. In fact, I can remember him and Nickers playing with toys in your room." Vito pulled the gag out of Bobby's mouth and watched him, waiting to see whether or not he'd speak. When Cork was silent, Vito moved on to the Romero brothers. "These two," he said, pulling the gags out of their mouths. "They live in our neighborhood. Nico here," he said, pulling his gag away, "lives around the corner from us. His family's friends of our family." Vito moved to little Stevie and looked at him with contempt. "And this one," he said, and ripped the gag away. "I don't know." "I told you!" Stevie yelled as soon as the gag was out of his mouth. "I don't run with these mutts anymore." Richie Gatto pulled a gun from his shoulder holster and cocked the hammer. To Stevie he said, "Be healthier for you to shut up." Vito moved to the center of the semicircle. "Every one of these boys except this one," he said, pointing to Stevie, "tells me you have nothing to do with any of the jobs they pulled." He looked to little Stevie again. "This one, though, he says that they're all your gang, that you've been running the whole thing." Vito moved toward Sonny. "The others defend you," he said. "They say he's got it in for you." When he was standing practically on top of Sonny, he stopped and paused and stared. Sonny followed Vito through the warehouse, past the flatbed pickup with its hood open and engine parts spread around on the floor, past more crates of olive oil, over the grease-stained concrete floor, and out a back door into a wide cobblestone alleyway where a line of delivery trucks was parked under a latticework of black fire escapes. A cold wind blew through the alley, swirling bits of dust and trash and wimpling the tarps over the stake-bed trucks. Vito stood with his back to Sonny, looking down the length of the alley and out to Baxter Street. He had left his overcoat in the warehouse, and he pulled his jacket tight and hunched his shoulders as he folded his arms over his chest. Sonny leaned against the warehouse door as he watched his father's back. He felt tired suddenly, and he let his head fall back and knock into the metal of the door. On one of the fire escapes across from him, he noticed a battered child's toy, a plush tiger with its neck ripped open, spilling tufts of white stuffing into the wind. "Pop," Sonny said, and then he couldn't think of what he wanted to say next. He watched the wind mussing his father's hair, and he had a crazy urge to fix it for him, to comb it back in place with his fingers. When Vito turned around, his face was unforgiving. He watched Sonny in silence and then pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and dabbed blood from Sonny's lip and chin. Sonny hadn't realized he was bleeding until he saw the handkerchief come away from his face red with blood. He touched his lip roughly and winced a little at the pain. "Pop," he said, and hesitated. He couldn't seem to get any words out beyond the easy and familiar "Pop." "How could you do this to us?" Vito asked. "To your mother and father, to your family." "Pop," Sonny said again. "Pop," he repeated. "I know who you are. I've known for years. Hell, Pop, everybody knows who you are." "And who is that?" Vito asked. "Who is it you think I am?" "I don't want to be a working schmuck," Sonny said, "getting his hands covered with grease for a few bucks a day. I want to be respected like you," he said. "I want to be feared like you." "I ask you again," Vito said, and he took a step closer to Sonny as the wind blew through his hair, making him look like a wild man. "Who is it you think I am?" "You're a gangster," Sonny said. "Until repeal, your trucks were running hooch. You're into gambling and shylocking, and you're big in the unions." Sonny clasped his hands together and shook them for emphasis. "I know what everybody knows, Pop." "You know what everybody knows," Vito repeated. He turned his head to the sky and ran his fingers through his hair, working against the wind to push it back in place. "Pop," Sonny said. He saw hurt in his father's eyes, and he wished he could take back what he just said, or else say something to make his father understand that he respected him for who he was. But no words came to mind, and he could think of nothing to do or say to make the moment easier. "You're mistaken," Vito said, still looking at the sky. "If you think I'm a common gangster." He was quiet another second before he finally turned his eyes to Sonny. "I'm a businessman," he said. "I admit, yes, I get my hands dirty working with the likes of Giuseppe Mariposa. But I am not a man like Giuseppe. And if that's what you think, you're wrong." "Ah, Pop," Sonny said, and he walked past his father and turned around in a circle before facing him again. "I'm so tired of this, with you always pretending to be somebody you're not. I know you do it for our sake, but I'm sorry," he said. "I know what you do. I know who you are. You run numbers and gambling in most of the Bronx. You're in the unions and protection, and you have the olive oil business. Sonny folded his hands in front of him as if in prayer. "I'm sorry, Pop," he said, "but I know who you are and what you do." "You think you know," Vito said. He moved into a space between two trucks, out of the wind, and waited for Sonny to follow. "But you don't know anything," he continued once Sonny was standing opposite him again. "It's not a secret, the dirty parts of my business. But I'm not a gangster like you're making me out to be. I'm no Al Capone. I'm no Giuseppe Mariposa with his drugs and women and murder. A man like me, I couldn't get to where I am without getting my hands dirty, Sonny. That's the way it is, and I accept the consequences. But it doesn't have to be like that for you. It won't be like that for you." Vito put a hand around the back of Sonny's neck. "Put this out of your mind, this gangster business," he said. "This is not why I work so hard, so that my son could be a gangster. I won't allow it, Sonny." Sonny's chin dropped to his chest and he closed his eyes. The black tarps over the trucks on either side of him whipped and snapped in the wind. In the little space between the trucks where he stood with his father, Vito seemed frozen in place as he watched his son. Slowly, the color came back into his face and his grip on Sonny's jaw loosened. When he finally let him go, his hands dropped to his sides, and then he shoved them deep into his pants pockets. "Go inside and get Clemenza," he said, as if nothing out of the usual had just transpired. "Pop?" Vito raised his hand to Sonny. "Do as I say. Send Clemenza out to me." Sonny watched his father's face and saw nothing at all that he could read in his expression. "Okay, Pop," he said. "What do I tell Clemenza?" Vito looked amazed. "Is this too difficult a job for you?" he asked. "Go inside. Find Clemenza. Send him out for me. You wait inside with the others." "Sure," Sonny answered. He slipped through the metal door and disappeared into the warehouse. Alone in the alley, Vito went to the first truck in the line and got into the cab. He started the engine, checked the heat gauge, and turned the rearview mirror to him, meaning to straighten out his hair, but instead he wound up staring at the eyes staring back at him. There wasn't a thought in his head. His eyes looked to him like the eyes of an old man, watery and bloodshot from the wind, with a crow's nest of wrinkles emanating out to his temples. He watched his own eyes, and it was as if there were two of him in the cab. Two sets of his own eyes, staring at each other as if each was a mystery to the other. When Clemenza banged on the door, it startled him. He rolled down the window. "Send Tessio home," he said. "Let him take Eddie and Ken with him." "What happened with Sonny?" Clemenza asked. Vito ignored the question. "Tie up Sonny with the others," he said. Willie O'Rourke held a gray tumbler pigeon cradled in the palm of his left hand while he inspected its feathers, combing through them gently. He was kneeling just outside the pigeon coop, the rooftop ledge to his back and the roof door to his right, in front of him. Through the wire mesh of the coop, he could see the door and a canvas and wood beach chair set up alongside it, where he had been sitting in the cold a few minutes earlier, watching a tugboat pull a freighter up the river. The tumbler was one of his favorites, a gray with a coal-black mask. In flight, it would break suddenly from the flock and seem to fall before catching itself and flying again with the others. When the birds flew, he watched and waited for this tumbling that gave the breed its name, and his heart still jumped a little every time. Will finished inspecting the bird and put it back inside the coop with the others before he went about spreading fresh straw to help keep the flock from freezing in the bitter cold. When he was done, he sat on the roof ledge, huddled inside his overcoat, curled up against the biting wind that blew along the avenue and over the rooftops. With the wind whistling in his ears, he allowed himself a moment to think. Donnie lay dead to the world in the bedroom below him, defeated by his blindness and by Kelly's death. Doc Flaherty said he was depressed and that in time he'd get over it, but Willie found that doubtful. Donnie barely spoke at all anymore, and he was wasting away. Everyone thought it was the blindness that took the heart out of him, but Willie didn't think so. Donnie had seemed furious for a time at the loss of his sight, and then he lapsed into sullenness. But it was the news of Kelly's death, and the manner of her death, that had seemed to knock the last of the life out of him. He hadn't spoken a dozen words in all the time since it happened. He lay there day and night, silent in the dark of his bedroom. The only difference Will could see between Donnie and a corpse was that Donnie happened to be breathing. When Willie pulled himself up from the ledge and turned around, he found Luca Brazzi sitting with his back to him in the beach chair, one of his boys, gun drawn, guarding the roof door. At first, Willie was confused at the sight, since he hadn't heard a thing, and then he realized the roar of the wind explained it. All he could see of Luca was his back and the top of his fedora and a white scarf that wrapped around his neck, but there was no doubting that it was Luca Brazzi. The man's bulk made the beach chair look like a piece of toy furniture. And then there was his boy at the door, the one Willie'd shot in the arm. He recognized him from the bank stick-up. Willie glanced once at the black loops of the fire escape ladder on the other side of the roof, and then back to the figure at the door, who was standing with his hands together dangling over his lap. A bright silver revolver that looked like something out of a Tom Mix Western held loosely in a gloved hand. "What do you want?" he shouted at Luca's back over the wind. Luca lifted himself from the chair and turned around with one hand holding the collar of his overcoat at the neck and the other in his coat pocket. Willie didn't realize he was moving backward until he bumped against the ledge. Luca's face was gray and corpse-like, and one side was lower than the other, like someone who'd had a stroke. "Jesus Christ," Willie said and laughed. "You look like fucking Boris Karloff in Frankenstein." He touched his eyebrows. "Especially the monkey forehead," he added. Luca ran his fingers over the drooping side of his face as if considering Willie's appraisal. "What do you want?" Willie asked. "Haven't you done enough? You already blinded Donnie and killed Kelly, you fucking scumbag." "But you're the one took the shots at me," Luca said, and he put his hands in his pockets again. "You're the one who said you won't miss next time." Luca glanced quickly to Paulie at the door as if he had just remembered that he was there. "I can't help but notice," he went on, turning back to Willie. "There hasn't been a next time. What happened? Did your boys get nervous?" "Fuck you," Willie said, and he walked up to Luca until he was standing in front of him. "Fuck you and your dead mother, and your burned-up baby and all your sick, wop, degenerate friends, and fuck Kelly, too, for ever having had anything to do with you." Luca's hands shot out of his pockets and took Willie by the neck. He lifted him up as if he were a doll and held him in the air. Willie's arms and legs flailed weakly as he kicked and punched at Luca, landing blows as powerless and ineffectual as a child's. Luca tightened his grip around Willie's neck until Willie was seconds away from losing consciousness, and then he dropped into the ground. Vito pulled the truck into the alley behind the warehouse, parked it at the back of the line, and cut the engine. The day was cold and windy under a blue sky pockmarked with tufts of white clouds. He was just back from a short trip to the East River, where he'd parked in a quiet spot under the Williamsburg Bridge and spent 20 minutes watching sunlight on the blue-gray surface of the water. He'd replayed the conversation with Sonny, a few lines of which repeated again and again. "You're a gangster. You're a mob guy. You kill people." And a sea swell of turbulence threatened him, something rising out of the bottom of his stomach that made his fingers twitch, that made him blink and shudder. He waited in the truck and watched the water until a peaceful, deliberate anger tamped down whatever it was inside him threatening to erupt. There'd been a moment watching the water when he thought he might have felt tears welling, but he hadn't shed a tear out of fear or anger or pain since he'd left Sicily, and he didn't in the cab of the truck looking out at the river. Something about the water itself calmed him, something that came to him through 1,000 years of ancestors who turned to the water for sustenance. In the hold of an ocean liner, a boy among strangers He'd watched the ocean day and night on his journey to America. Unable to bury his family properly, he'd buried them in his mind. He'd watched the ocean and waited calmly for whatever he would need to do next. In the cab of his truck under the traffic on the Williamsburg Bridge close to the river, he waited again. Sonny was a boy. He knew nothing. His blood, yes, Vito's blood, but too foolish to understand the choice he was making, too young and not smart enough. So, Vito had finally said to himself, every man has his own destiny. Each word spoken aloud, tinged with a mix of anger and acceptance. And he'd started the engine and drove back to Hester Street. On the way to his office inside the warehouse, he shouted for Clemenza, and the name bounced off the high ceiling as Vito closed his office door behind him and took a seat at his desk. From one of the drawers, he pulled out a bottle of Strega and a tumbler, and he poured himself a drink. The office was bare, thin wooden walls painted a muted green, a desk with a scattering of papers and pencils spread across a fake wood veneer, a few chairs lined against the walls, a metal hall tree behind the desk, a cheap filing cabinet next to the hall tree. Vito did all his real work at home, in his study, and spent hardly any time in this office. He glanced around at the tawdry surroundings and was filled with disgust. When Clemenza came through the door, Vito asked, before Clemenza had a chance to sit down, "Who pissed his pants?" Clemenza said, and pulled the chair up to the desk. "Don't sit down," Vito said. Clemenza pushed the chair aside. "Nobody pissed his pants, Vito," he said. "They're tough kids." "Good," Vito said. "At least there's that." He lifted the glass of Strega to his lips and held it there a moment as if he had forgotten what he was doing. He looked over the tumbler and past Clemenza, his eyes focused on nothing. "Vito," Clemenza said, and his tone of voice suggested he was about to console Vito, to talk to him about Sonny. Vito raised his hand to silence him. "Find something for all of them except the Irish," he said. "Let Tessio take the Romeros, and you take Nico and Sonny." "And the Irish?" Clemenza asked. "Let them go on and be cops and politicians and union hotshots, and we'll pay them off on that end," Vito said. He pushed the glass of Strega away from him, splashing the yellow liqueur onto a sheet of paper. "Okay," Clemenza said. "I'll make them understand." "Good," Vito said. He added, his tone of voice changing suddenly, "Keep Sonny close to—" When Sonny came into the office, he was massaging the raw skin where his wrists had been tied behind his back. He looked at his father briefly and then looked away. Vito came around from behind his desk, dragged 2 chairs away from the wall, and pulled them to Sonny. "Sit down," he said. Once Sonny was seated, he took a seat facing him. "Be quiet and listen to me. I have some things I want to tell you." Vito folded his hands in his lap and gathered his thoughts. "This is not what I wanted for you," he said. "But I can see that I can't keep you from it. The best I can do is keep you from acting like a fool and getting yourself and your friends killed over a few dollars by a wild man like Giuseppe Mariposa." "Nobody ever got a scratch," Sonny said, and then was silent again when he saw the look in his father's eyes. "We'll talk about this matter once," Vito said, raising his finger. "And then I don't want to talk about it ever again." Vito tugged at the bottom of his vest and then folded his hands over his belly. He coughed and then continued. "I'm sorry you witnessed what you did," he said. "Tom's father was a degenerate gambler and a drunk. Back then, I was not who I am now. Henry Hagen insulted us in a way that, had I kept Clemenza and Tessio from doing what they did, I would have lost their respect. In this business, as in life, respect is everything. In this life, Sonny, you can't demand respect. You must command it. Are you listening to me?" When Sonny nodded, Vito added, "But I am not a man who enjoys that kind of thing. And I'm not a man
who wants that kind of thing to happen. But I am a man, and I do what has to be done for my family. For my family, Sonny.
Vito looked at the glass of Strega on his desk as if he was considering taking another drink, and then looked back to Sonny.
I have one question for you, he said, and I'd like a simple answer. When you brought Tom back to our home all those years ago, when you set him down in that chair before me, you knew I was responsible for him being an orphan. And you were accusing me, weren't you?
No, Pop, Sonny said, and he started to reach for his father before he pulled it.
Listen to me carefully, Sonny,
he said.
In this business, if you don't learn to control that temper of yours, the grave will come sooner than you think.
I understand, Pop, Sonny said. I'll learn. I will.
I say to you again,
Vito said.
I did not want this for you.
He folded his hands in front of him as if indulging in one final prayer.
There is more money and more power in the legitimate business world, he said. And there's nobody coming to kill you the way it has always been for me. When I was a boy, men came and killed my father. When my brother swore revenge, they killed him too. When my mother pleaded for my life, they killed her, and then they came looking for me. I escaped, and I made my life here in America. But always in this business, there are men who want to kill you. So that I never escaped.
When Sonny looked shocked, Vito said,
No, I never told you these things. Why should I? I hoped to keep them from you.
Vito looked to Sonny again. As if with a final hope that Sonny might change his mind, he said,
This is not the life I want for you, Sonny.
Pop, Sonny answered, deaf to Vito's wishes. I'll be someone you can always trust. I'll be your right-hand man. Vito watched Sonny another moment and then almost imperceptibly shook his head, as if reluctantly but finally giving up.
With you as my right-hand man,
he said, and he got up and shoved his chair aside.
You'll make your mother a widow and yourself an orphan.
Sonny seemed to think about his father's words as if he didn't understand what was being said. Before he could respond, Vito went back to his desk.
Clemenza will teach you the business,
he said, the desk between him and his son.
You'll start at the bottom, like everyone else.
Okay, Pop, sure, Sonny said, and though he was obviously trying to contain his excitement and sound professional, he failed. Vito only frowned at Sonny's excitement.
What about Michael and Fredo?
He asked.
And Tom? Do they all think I'm a gangster too?
Tom knows about the gambling and the unions, Sonny said. But like you said, Pop, it's not a secret.
But that's not what I asked,
Vito said, and he tugged at his ear.
Learn to listen. I asked if he thinks I'm a gangster.
Pop, Sonny said, I know you're not a guy like Mariposa. I never meant that. I know you're no crazy man like Al Capone. Vito nodded, grateful for at least that.
What about Fredo and Michael?
He asked. Nah, Sonny said. You hang the moon for the kids. They don't know nothing.
But they will,
Vito said.
Just like you and Tom.
He took a seat behind his desk.
Clemenza and Tessie will take care of your boys,
he said.
You'll work for Clemenza.
Sonny grinned and said, They're in there thinking you're about to give them a bad case of lead poisoning.
What about you?
Vito asked.
Did you think I'd have you killed?
Nah, didn't figure it, Pop. Sonny laughed as if clearly the thought had never entered his mind. Vito didn't laugh. He looked grim.
The Irish boys are on their own, he said. They don't have a place with us.
But Cork's a good man, Sonny said. He's smarter.
Startes it.
Vito slapped his desk, sending a pencil flying to the floor.
You don't question me. Now I'm your father and I'm your Don. You do as you're told. By me and by Clemenza and by Tessio.
Sure, Sonny said, and he bit his lip. I'll tell Cork, he added. He ain't gonna be happy, but I'll tell him. Little Stevie, I got half a mind to put a bullet in his head myself.
You got half a mind to put a bullet in his head?
Vito said.
What's wrong with you, Sonny?
Maron, Pop, Sonny said, throwing up his hands. It's just a figure of speech. Vito gestured toward the door.
Go on,
he said.
Go talk to your boys.
Once Sonny was gone, Vito noticed for the first time that his overcoat, scarf, and hat were hanging on the hall tree. Book 2. Guerra. Spring 1934. 18. In the dream, someone, a man, is floating away from Sonny on a raft. Sonny is in a tunnel or a cave, the light eerie and shimmering, the way it gets before a storm. He's in a riverbed up to his knees. He splashes through water. He's definitely in a cave. Water drips like rain from the darkness over his head as rough stone walls sweat and release little waterfalls into the river. He can just make out a man's shape in the distance, moving swiftly, perched atop the raft as a fast-moving current pulls it around a bend. The cave is in a jungle full of monkey chatter and bird squawks under the rhythmic chanting and drumbeat of natives who are hidden among trees. One second, Sonny is splashing through water in patent leather shoes and a three-piece suit, trying to catch up to the raft, and the next, he's looking up into Eileen's eyes as she leans over him and touches his cheek with the palm of her hand. They're in Eileen's bed. Outside, a low rumble of thunder growled as it rolled through the streets and built toward a window-shaking boom, followed by a violent gust of wind that rattled the Venetian blinds and sent a pair of sheer white curtains flying back at right angles to the wall. Eileen slammed the window down and then sat up beside Sonny and brushed hair off his forehead. "What were you dreaming?" she asked. "You were moaning and thrashing." Sonny propped a second pillow under his head and pulled himself up out of his dream. He laughed a little and said, "Tarzan the Ape Man. I saw it last Saturday at the Rialto." Eileen slid down beside him under a faded green blanket. She held a silvery cigarette lighter and a pack of wings as she craned her neck and watched the window. A sudden downpour beat against the glass and filled the room with the sound of rain and wind. "This is nice," she said, and she tapped 2 cigarettes out of the pack and handed one to Sonny. Sonny took the lighter from her and looked it over. He had to fiddle with it a bit before he figured out how it worked, and then he squeezed it between his thumb and forefinger, and the top popped up, unleashing a blue flame. He lit Eileen's cigarette and then his own. Eileen found an ashtray on the night table beside the bed and settled it on the blanket over her knees. "And who were you in this dream, then?" she asked. "Johnny Weissmuller?" The dream had already faded from Sonny's memory. "I was in the jungle, I think. With Maureen O'Sullivan, I don't doubt. Now she's a great Irish beauty, don't you think?" Sonny inhaled a lungful of smoke and waited a second before he answered. He liked the light golden brown of Eileen's eyes and how they seemed as though they were somehow lighted up in contrast to the fairness of her skin framed by her hair, which was tousled a little in a way that made her look like a kid. "I think you're a great Irish beauty," he said. He found her hand under the covers and entwined his fingers with hers. Eileen laughed and said,
"Aren't you the Casanova, Sonny Corleone?"
Sonny let go of her hand and sat up straight. "Did I say something wrong?" "Nah," Sonny answered. "Only I don't like it, the Casanova remark." "And why is that?" Eileen found his hand again and held it. "I didn't mean anything." "I know." Sonny took a moment to gather his thoughts. "My father," he said. "That's what he thinks of me. I'm a schupa feminina, a playboy, Take my word for it, it's not a compliment. Ah, Sonny. Eileen's tone suggested that Sonny's father had a point. I'm young, Sonny said. This is America, not some village in Sicily. True enough, Eileen said. Anyway, I thought Italians were expected to be great lovers. Why, Rudy Valentino? Sonny stubbed out his cigarette. Chasing around after women is not considered manly among Italians. It's a sign of a weak character. And this is what your father thinks of you, that you have a weak character. Jesus Christ, Sonny said, and he threw up his hands in frustration. I don't know what my father thinks of me. I can't do anything right. Treats me like I'm some jamope. Him and Clemenza, too, both of them. Jamope? Jerk. This is because you run around after women. It don't help. And does it matter to you, Sonny? Eileen asked. She laid a hand on his thigh. Is it important to you what your father thinks? Geez, Sonny said. Sure. Sure it's important to me. Eileen slid away from him. She found a slip on the floor beside the bed and pulled it on over her head. Forgive me, Sonny, she said, not looking at him. Then she was quiet a second, the patter of the rain the only sound in the bedroom. Ah, Sonny, she went on. Your father's a gangster now, isn't he? Sonny answered with a shrug. He threw his legs over the side of the bed and looked around for his underwear. What do you have to do to gain the approval of a gangster? Eileen asked, a sudden touch of anger in her voice. Kill somebody? Wouldn't hurt if it was the right person. Jesus Christ, Eileen said. She sounded furious. An instant later, she laughed as if she had just remembered that this wasn't any of her business. Sonny Corleone, she said, and she watched his back as he pulled on his pants. All this will get you is heartache. All what'll get me? Eileen crawled across the bed and wrapped her arms around him. She kissed him on the neck. You're a beautiful boy. Sonny reached behind him to pat her leg. I'm no boy. I forgot, Eileen said. You're 18 now. Don't make fun of me. Sonny went about putting on his shoes with Eileen hanging on his back. If you don't want your father to think of you as a chupa feminine, Eileen said, mimicking Sonny's pronunciation of the word exactly, then marry your 16-year-old beauty. 17 now, Sonny said, and he tied his shoelace in a neat bow. So marry her, Eileen repeated, or get engaged, and then keep that sausage in your pants, or at least be discreet. Be what? Don't get caught. Sonny stopped what he was doing, and when Sonny finished dressing, he found her at the sink washing dishes. With the light of the kitchen window behind her, he could see her body's outline beneath the white cotton slip hanging loosely from her shoulders. She may have been 10 years older than Sonny, and she may have been Caitlin's mother, but hell if he could tell by looking at her. After watching her for only a few seconds, he knew what he really wanted was to get her back in the bedroom. What are you staring at? Eileen asked, without looking up from the pot she was scrubbing. When Sonny didn't answer, she turned to him, saw the grin on his face, and then looked to the window and down at her slip. Getting a show, are you? She rinsed off the dish and placed it in the tub next to the sink. Sonny came up behind her and kissed her on the back of the neck. What if I'm in love with you? He asked. You're not in love with me, Eileen said. She spun around, wrapped her arms around his waist, and kissed him. I'm the floozy you're sowing your wild oats with. You don't marry a woman like me. You have some fun with her is all. You're no floozy. Sonny took her hands in his. If I'm not a floozy, she said, then what am I doing bedding my little brother's best friend, or ex-best friend? She added, as if it were a question she'd been meaning to ask. And what's the story between you two? You haven't been bedding your little brother's best friend for a long time now, for the record, Sonny said. And me and Cork? That's why I came over here, trying to straighten things out between us. You can't be coming here by yourself anymore, Sonny. Eileen squeezed out from between him in the sink and went to get his hat from the shelf beside the front door. This was sweet, she said. But unless you're with Cork, don't come here again, please. Que cazzo, Sonny said. I only came here after I went to Cork's place and he wasn't there. Be that as it may, Eileen said, holding his fedora over her chest. You can't be coming here alone, Sonny Corleone. It won't do. Dollface, Sonny said, approaching her. You're the one dragged me into bed. I was only looking for Cork. I don't recall doing much dragging, Eileen answered. She handed him his hat. Okay, so I admit, Sonny said, and he tossed his hat up onto his head. You didn't have to do much dragging, but still, I came here looking for Cork. He kissed her on the forehead. I'm glad things worked out the way they did, though. I'm sure you are, Eileen said, and then, as if she just remembered, she returned to her earlier question. What's the story with you and Cork? She asked. He won't tell me a thing, but he's moping around all the time like he doesn't know what to do with himself. We parted company, Sonny said, business-wise. He's mad at me about that. Eileen cocked her head. Are you saying he's not running with you at all anymore? No more, Sonny said. We parted ways. How'd that come to pass? A long story. Sonny adjusted his hat. Tell Cork I want to see him, though. This not talking, it's... We should talk, me and him. Tell him I came looking for him to tell him that. Eileen watched Sonny. Are you saying, she asked, that Cork is no longer in the same business as you? I don't know what business Cork's in now. Sonny reached around her for the door. But whatever it is, we're not in it together. We've gone our separate ways. Vito moved away from the desk and turned his back on Sonny when he came through the office door, sputtering excuses. He fixed his eyes on his fedora and jacket hanging off the metal hall tree and waited for Sonny to shut up, which didn't happen until Clemenza told him to sit down and be quiet. When he turned around and looked out over the office again, Vito sighed in Sonny's direction, making his displeasure obvious. Sonny straddled a chair by the door, his arms wrapped around the backrest. He looked eagerly at Vito, over the heads of Genco and Tessio. Clemenza was sitting on the file cabinet, and he shrugged when he met Vito's eyes, as if to say about Sonny showing up late for the meeting, "What are you going to do?" Outside, a thunderclap quickly followed a crack of lightning, as another in a line of spring storms passed over the city. Vito spoke as he took off his cufflinks and rolled up his sleeves.
Mariposa summoned all the families in New York and New Jersey to a meeting, he said, looking at Sonny, making it clear that he was repeating himself for his benefit. To show his pure intentions, he's holding this meeting on Sunday afternoon at St. Francis in Midtown.
Finished rolling up his sleeves, Vito paused and loosened his tie.
It's a good move on his part, bringing us to St. Francis on a Sunday. He's showing he doesn't intend any dirty business, but,
Vito added, looking to Tessio and Clemenza,
men have been killed in church before. So I want your boys close by, all over the neighborhood, on the streets and the restaurants, anywhere they can be reached quickly if we need them.
Sure, Tessio said, his tone no more glum or somber than usual. That's easy, Clemenza said. That won't be no problem, Vito.
At this meeting,
Vito continued, turning to Sonny,
I'm taking Luca Brazzi as my bodyguard, and I want you there as Genco's bodyguard.
Sure, Pop, Sonny answered, tilting his chair forward. Sure thing. Clemenza's face reddened at Sonny's response.
All you do is stand behind Genco and say nothing,
Vito said, speaking each word precisely, as if Sonny were a little stupid and he needed to speak slowly for his benefit.
Do you understand? He asked. They know you're in the business already. Now I want them to know that you're close to me. That's why you'll be at this meeting.
Sonny said, I got it, Pop, sure. Vaffanculo, Clemenza shouted, raising a fist to Sonny. How many times I gotta tell you not to call your father Pop when we're doing business? When we're doing business, just nod your head like I told you, capiche?
Clemenza and Tessio,
Vito said, not giving Sonny a chance to open his mouth.
You'll be close by outside the church in case we need you. I'm sure these precautions are not necessary, but I'm a cautious man by nature.
Vito turned again to Sonny as if he had something more to say to him, Instead, he looked to Zhenko.
"Consigliere," he said, "do you have any ideas about this meeting? Any guesses about what Mariposa will say?"
Zhenko juggled his hands in his lap, as if he were tossing around ideas. "As you know," he said, turning slightly in his chair to address everyone in the room, "we had no advance word from anyone about this meeting, not even our friend, who wasn't told until we were. Our friend has no knowledge himself of the purpose of the meeting." He stopped and pulled at his cheek, mulling over his words. "Mariposa has smoothed out the last of the problems with the Leconte organization," he said. "And now all that used to be Leconte's is his. This makes his far and away the most powerful family." Zhenko opened his hands as if holding a basketball. "I think he's bringing us together to let us know who'll be calling the shots from now on. Given his strengths, that's reasonable. Whether or not we can go along, that depends on what shots he wants to call." "And you think we're going to find out at the meeting?" Tessio asked. "That would be my guess," Zhenko answered. Vito pushed a stack of papers aside and leaned back on his desk.
"Giuseppe is greedy," he said. "Now that whiskey is legal, he'll cry out how poor he is. And he'll want money from all of us in some way, maybe a tax. I don't know. But he'll want a piece of our earnings. This is what we all saw coming when he went after Leconte. Now the time is here, and that's what this meeting will be about."
"He's strong now," Tessio said. "We won't have any choice but to go along, even if he asks more than we like." "Pop," Sonny said, and then immediately corrected himself. "Don," he said. But the word obviously felt wrong to him, and he stood up, exasperated. "Listen," he said. "Everybody knows Mariposa's got it in for us. I say, why don't we blast him? Right there, in the church, where he won't be expecting it. Bada boom, bada bing," he yelled, slapping his hands together. "Mariposa's out of the picture, and everybody knows what happens if you go up against the Corleones." Vito looked at Sonny with an utterly blank face as the sound of voices in the room